This is the Making Noise podcast.
I like when people, I like asking questions, and I like being asked questions that I really don't know a lot about. Like if someone asks me something about a topic that I'm unfamiliar with, I like it because then it makes me have to think about, well, what do I think about that thing with my limited knowledge? That doesn't mean that I'm right or that I'm wrong, but it just like it engages the critical thinking and you know, and I always appreciate that. You know, like I said, asking and being asked those questions.
Yeah.
Oh shit, what was I gonna say? I can't remember.
The other thing about it too is I think you and your opinions are not necessarily the same thing. Like you can change your mind and you can like learn, and like that's what an intellectual life is, you know, like you engage, you think, you read, you talk, you change your mind, you learn, like whatever. Like it's not that big of a deal. Like, you know, right now I really don't like the new Star Wars movies. But like in 10 years, maybe I'll look back on them and be like, actually, you know, like they're not that bad. And that's okay. Like that's fine. And it's the same way about like any kind of artistic practice. Like you can grow and change and like engage and like say something and then 5 years later not feel that way anymore. Like a lot of the music I was making when I started like writing experimental music was like text scores and graphic scores and that kind of thing. And then I totally stopped doing that and like kind of actively like shat on that kind of thing. But now that's my jam. Like I didn't realize, like I didn't know what I didn't know. And so learning and figuring out what I do know and what I do care about, what I do like through those challenging conversations and like really talking about it and stuff, that makes you more engaged with your stuff, but then everybody else's. And then if somebody has a point that can convince you, you don't need to be like defensive about it. It's just talking, you know, like it's that kind of just engaging critically with your own opinions, you know.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, it's sort of an interesting thing. I've noticed that a lot of people seem more reluctant to give their view on something. Like I've had conversations with people and I'll ask them a question and they'll be like, oh, I don't know enough about that to talk about it. And I'm like, that's okay. I don't know anything about it either, but what are your thoughts about it? Like,
Yeah.
I just want to know what you think. I don't want to know what someone else thinks that you're telling me, you know?
Yeah, true. Like you also, yeah. What somebody else thinks that you're telling me. Yeah. But at the same time, like your opinions are generally a synthesis of what you've heard and read and what you agree with or what you disagree with.
Totally.
That's what intellectual inquiry is too, like taking other people's ideas and mouthing them into your idea. I don't know, but I mean that's kind of what makes friendships like valuable, is how you like back and forth engage with those kind of things. Like when you're close enough with people to really talk about stuff, or if you're just like two kind of people that can really dig into something, you know, you might not, nobody's gonna win, whatever that means. Nobody's gonna like, there's not, it's not like you're trying to beat somebody. It's that you're trying to just engage in that space of like thought and inquiry, but also like affirmation of like, yeah, we care about this enough to talk about it, and like we care about each other enough to at least listen. Which I think that kind of stuff is valuable. I think there's folks that don't want to do that. There's plenty, everybody knows somebody that doesn't want to hear other opinions, but I don't know, I think it's kind of boring.
I think that's true. I do think also that there's an amount of people don't want to be wrong. They also don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, and I think it's true about everybody. Like, I don't want to be wrong either. Like, and I don't want to say the wrong thing either. I'm like, I'm trying to be very thoughtful with this conversation right now because like people are going to listen to this. Like it's not just you and I on the phone, Adam. And I don't want to be wrong, but like my mindset's different because of that, you know. But that's not the same thing as being like an asshole about it. I don't think that's the same thing at all. I think like especially in 2020, like there's just like so much of that going on, like people just doubling down on it, and like I've like to the point that it's almost surprising when people are like, oh no, you're right. Like, you know what I mean? Like that, like sometimes that's like, oh, I didn't expect you to actually end up agreeing with me at the end of this conversation. Like, why is that weird? Like, why is it weird that people can come to terms like that? It shouldn't be.
What do you mean exactly?
Cool with that, you know?
What do you mean come to terms with what, like agreeing with someone?
Yeah, like there's definitely I have found myself sometimes surprised when like I disagree with somebody and we get into like a conversation about something and that their opinion changes because like they agree with what I've said. Because I'm so like I feel like everybody's so used to people just like doubling down. I'm like, no, this is what I think, and I'm not going to change that, no matter what you say. That when people are like, oh, you're right, I was wrong. That like that's kind of weird, and like even like you know, I don't want to get like super political with this conversation, but like stuff going on with like the election right now, like there's just factual things that people are just like doubling down on being incorrect. And like it's not like I just don't get it. Like I just don't understand why folks can double down on just like falsehood like that. Like, but I think that kind of permeates in a casual conversation. Like, you know, I don't like the new Star Wars movies, and if I get into conversation about it, like I'll find myself doubling down on how much I don't like it, while that person is doubling down on how much they do like it, and it doesn't go anywhere. It's just us yelling at each other, and like maybe that's entertaining, but it's also like not the most healthy way to look at the world, you know, because it does bleed into other stuff, and then you just start ignoring reality at a certain point. If you take that to its logical conclusion, you'll ignore facts, and like people saying like coronavirus, it's not even as bad as the flu. That is factually incorrect. Like it has been demonstrated to be incorrect. Or like people are saying like, you know, oh, I don't get enough oxygen when I wear my mask. That is factually incorrect. Like that has been demonstrated to be incorrect, but people just like don't want to hear it for whatever reason. And so it's when you talk about art, it is even more strange, I think, because somebody liking X piece and somebody not liking X piece is not going to result in somebody in a coma. You know, it's a piece of music. It's not that the stakes aren't that high. And when you open up to the possibility that like you might be wrong or like somebody else might be more correct, I think you open yourself up to that kind of engagement with more meaningful spaces too. Like, because when the stakes are low and you're coming to fight, I just think that's an unproductive way to look at the world, you know?
Yeah, I think part of that too, all really well said, by the way. But I think a part of that too is also how the person is coming to that conversation. Like, are they coming with the intent of educating or being educated, or like trying to discuss, like, or neither, like, you know, because that matters. And I think that's a lot of where resistance can come from. Is when you hear someone saying something that you already disagree with, so then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, let me tell you about this. You know?
Yeah.
There's this book that I've mentioned a bunch of times on here, but I will never stop mentioning it because I think it's important. called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's by this psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. And it's a really, really interesting read. And he goes into kind of what we're talking about right now, where why people dig their heels into the sand about something even when they're wrong. And I forget what he calls it. Moral shit, I can't remember. Well, here I'll paint one of the scenarios that he gives because it's an interesting one. He says he gives this made up story about a brother and a sister who travel to the mountain, some mountain range in, like, I don't know, somewhere in Europe, and it's just the two of them, and they go camping, and they care a lot about each other, so they decide they want to have sex because it will strengthen their love and relationship with one another. She can't get pregnant because she's on birth control, or just maybe physically can't get pregnant. He can't impregnate her because, I don't know, his swimmers don't work. They have sex, and then that's it. They never do it again, and no one ever finds out about it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea here is like putting people in a position where it's like, what do you think about this? Is this wrong? And he's sort of painting the picture that, you know, the majority of the reasons why someone would say why it's wrong are kind of taken away. But a lot of people still will say, well, I don't know why. It's wrong to me. I believe it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not making a statement, by the way, whether I think it's right or wrong or anything. Yeah. I'm just explaining the scenario. What does he call that? But anyways, basically he's painting the picture that even when people are wrong, they still deny that they're wrong. They still will stand. I'm having trouble saying this. They will hold their stance in their position. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
In any case, very interesting read. And one of the things he explains too, when it comes to like having discussions and conversations, is we react emotionally and then go through moral reasoning to reinforce our reaction.
Yeah. So
like if you said, like, I don't know, COVID is worse than the flu. And I'm like, no, it's not. And then you're like, well, why? And I'm like, well, because, and then I try to reason my way through my response.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like backtracking in a way.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder if that example that you gave, I think it's challenging with that kind of stuff because it's so abstract, which I think is partially what happens with like gigantic existential crises.
Mm.
Like it's kind of abstract to think about. Like, you know, almost 300,000 people contracted COVID like the other day, you know. It's hard to reason that in your head. And so I think when people double down on that, maybe it's like just because you just kind of can't. So whatever, you just kind of default to something and dig your heels in. I don't know. I don't get it. Which maybe with like the example of the people that you were just giving the hypothetical about, and maybe it's like similar to that. Like you can't really know because it's too big, or in that case, it's too particular. Mm. It's too abstract that it's just, I don't know.
It's a weird scenario. Even, you know, like you're saying, people having trouble separating themselves or their ideals or beliefs with what is actually the case, you know, even statistically speaking. I don't know the book well enough, but I do think that he explains these things quite thoroughly and goes through this whole process of talking about the history of philosophy and how one philosophy informed another, which then led to another. And then at some point he says, anyone who believes in truth would not look to a philosopher to find truth or something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's a profound statement.